The wind carried the salty breath of the Gulf of Mexico across the small inlet, ruffling the surface of the water and sending gentle waves to lap at the rickety wooden pier. A dim glow marked a distant cluster of lights on the Louisiana shore. It was a typical humid night, thick air and brackish water conspiring to create the particular tang that working fishermen knew all too well. The few who bobbed on the horizon this evening were mostly night-trawler folk, quiet men who had done their day's share and simply wanted some rest. Out there, drifting in faint silhouette against the watery moonlight, was a 52-foot fishing trawler named the Pelican's fortune. The boat's hull bore chipped paint with a once-cheerful cartoon pelican now half-scratched away by years of salt. Barnacles clung stubbornly at the waterline. From the outside, it looked like any other rugged vessel that would spend its days hauling nets and crab traps, maybe shrimping in shallower waters, nothing at all to raise eyebrows. A small craft with an outdated radio system, one sputtering engine, and a perpetually squeaking door to the crew cabin. In short, it was exactly the kind of boat that a band of opportunistic criminals might see as an easy target. But sometimes appearances lie. And sometimes the unassuming becomes the unpredictable. That night, a group of modern pirates, rough men living along the Gulf, dabbling in the drug trade, black market fishing, and the occasional armed robbery, had turned their sights on the small trawler. By all evidence, it was a vessel they could commandeer quickly and easily. It was out here, somewhat remote and free of interference from the Coast Guard or other do-gooders. If it had anything of value, they would take it. If not, they might hold it, coerce the captain to pay ransom, or simply use the boat for smuggling. It was the plan. A sure thing, they told themselves. Yet these pirates did not know the man who owned the Pelican's fortune. They had no inkling that she belonged to Calvin Reed, a retired Marine Corps gunner known among old service buddies as the man with 9 lives and the temperament of a wolverine. Calvin had been quietly living out a second career as a local fisherman. He was as unassuming in outward posture as his boat was in outward appearance. He had wide shoulders, short silver hair, and a quiet, steady gaze. He liked to think he had left battle behind. But when trouble came hunting for him, Calvin was nobody's easy mark. Chapter 1. Setting sail into dangerous waters. Midweek nights saw fewer boats on these waters. The Pelican's fortune rocked gently, tugging at its anchor line. The open deck area behind the small pilot house was mostly bare, some netting piled to one side, a single crab pot rig, and a cooler jammed with half-melted ice. A single overhead bulb cast pale light. The craft seemed deserted, though occasionally a shadow moved within the cabin. Calvin had anchored in these quiet shallows after a successful day, with plans to rest for the night before heading back to shore at sunrise. The Gulf's warm breezes lulled him, the lapping waves singing a low lullaby. But trouble was coming for him. From the southeast, running dark and silent, a speedboat was approaching. It carried 4 men and 1 woman, each wearing tough expressions and brandishing sidearms or stubby submachine guns. Their plan was straightforward: come in fast but quiet, board the fishing boat, subdue anyone aboard, and either tow it or commandeer it and ditch their own craft. The loud hum of their engine was muffled by the distance, and they'd rigged the boat to keep its running lights off. As they neared the unsuspecting trawler, they could all but taste the success. The woman at the helm, Delilah Pierce, was slender and sharp-eyed, wearing her hair in cornrows and chewing gum with a kind of perpetual sneer. She guided the craft with a steady hand, scanning the dark horizon for watchers. Behind her, Errol Shiv Delgado carefully ran a cloth over his machete. The nickname Shiv was something of an understatement. He seemed to collect knives the way other people collected souvenir magnets. He had half a dozen strapped to his body, on his belt, at his boots, and a small one tucked in a hidden sheath around his shoulder. He was the first to see the silhouette of the Pelican's fortune come into sharper focus. His black eyes lit up. "They're not moving," he murmured. "Either they're asleep or that boat's empty." Robert "Bobby" Givens, the biggest in the group, flexed his hands around a battered shotgun. "Either way, it's ours." He offered up a short, humorless laugh that sounded more like a grunt. Bobby had a shaved head, a perpetually angry face, and arms covered in old tattoos half obscured by scar tissue. He was itching for a fight but secretly hoped this one would be easy. The less hassle, the better the payoff. Luther L.T. Timmons was a wiry older man, the face of the group for any business negotiations. He had a silver tongue and an eye for opportunity. That night, his ambition soared. "We do this quiet," he said. Take over, tie up the occupant if they're still aboard. Maybe we can get a quick ransom or see if it's worth shipping. Whatever money we can squeeze from this tub is more than we had yesterday. Lastly, there was Darren Joe, the youngest. A kid of about 21 or so he claimed. Darren's skittish eyes reflected the overhead glow from time to time. He was along for the ride because he had nowhere else to go, no home, no family to speak of, no prospects except for what this ragtag group offered him. He was no saint, but he had never killed anyone. He carried a pistol, though he hardly looked comfortable with it. He kept glancing to Delilah, seeking unspoken reassurance that everything would go smoothly. The 5 quiet pirates drew near. Over the gentle hum of the water, a faint beep signaled that they were in range. Delilah circled the trawler, scanning for signs of life. She saw no one on deck. A single overhead light burned inside the small pilot house. "This is it," she mouthed to the others, adrenaline thrumming in her veins. "Ready?" Errol nodded, grinning from ear to ear. The speedboat slowed, cutting back on the engines to minimize noise. It sidled up along the Pelican's fortune, fenders gently bumping. Bobby tossed a grappling hook onto the fishing boat's rail. The metal clanged slightly, but not loudly enough to rouse a heavy sleeper. Quickly, he climbed over, shotgun slung at his side. Errol followed, then LT, Delilah, and Darren last. They moved with the coordinated motions of men and a woman who had done this before, though mostly with commercial fishing boats or cargo vessels far out at sea. A small-time shrimp trawler was almost beneath them, but easy pickings were easy pickings. Bobby motioned for Errol to circle the deck and for Delilah to head into the cabin. The rest would remain on deck for a moment, ready to jump on any sign of trouble. Darren moved along, stepping carefully on the wet planks. He tried to swallow the lump in his throat. Something about the quiet spooked him, but he told himself it was just typical nighttime jitters. Delilah peered into the half-open door leading inside. Dim lights illuminated a cramped pilot house. Empty. She switched on a small flashlight, scanning the corners. Nets, rope, crates of supplies. No sign of a person. "Nobody's in here," she whispered. "Check below deck if there is one." Errol pointed to a set of steps leading downward. "Over there." They moved as a team toward the small hatch that led to what they assumed was a micro-kitchen or sleeping quarters. Darren stumbled over a coil of rope, cursing under his breath. Bobby flicked a glare at him, annoyed, but no alarms sounded. A boat like this usually had at least one occupant. Where was that occupant? Quietly, Errol opened the hatch, shining his knife into the darkness as if a blade alone could reveal any threat lurking there. Bobby reached over and clicked on a flashlight. The narrow beam fell upon a short, cramped corridor. They saw a latched metal door that might lead to a storage hold or engine room. Steps leading further down. Bobby took the lead, pumping the shotgun's action with a subdued click. "Watch my back," he hissed. Errol nodded. Their footsteps clanged on the metal rungs. The corridor smelled of salt, old fish, maybe diesel. The boat's engine was silent, though a generator might still be humming somewhere. They approached the door. Bobby tested it. Unlocked. He pushed it open with the shotgun barrel. Inside was a small storage area with shelves holding some fishing gear, extra rope, a few tools. Sacks of feed or something similar. It wasn't entirely well lit, though a flickering overhead light gave a partial view. In the corner, slumped awkwardly against a post, they spotted a man. He appeared to be bound at the wrists and ankles with thick rope. He had short, silver hair, a strong jaw, and an eerily calm expression on his lined face. His eyes were half-closed, almost as though he were dozing. "Hey!" Bobby barked. He pointed the flashlight in the man's face. Those steel-gray eyes blinked open. The man, Calvin Reed, didn't say a word at first. He simply regarded them. Errol advanced, brandishing the machete in case the man tried anything. But he was well tied from all appearances. The corners of the older man's mouth ticked slightly upward. "Found our occupant," Errol said. "He's tied up real good too." "Weird." Calvin spoke in a measured voice. "Took y'all long enough to come down here," he said, as if greeting invited guests. "I heard you clomping around like a herd of elephants on the deck." Bobby frowned, shining the light in Calvin's eyes. "What are you doing tied up like that? Where's the rest of your crew?" The big man's mind was racing. Why would someone be bound and left behind? Maybe he was the only one on board, maybe not. Calvin smirked faintly. "I don't have a crew. Just me. My boat. But somebody insisted I stay put, so here I am." Errol spat. "Somebody? Who?" Pirates like us. Something like that, Calvin replied, his tone still disturbingly relaxed. They came aboard a few hours ago. Didn't want me interfering with their plans? Bobby glanced at Errol, who shrugged. Possibly more modern pirates. Possibly the older man was lying. Either way, he was subdued. Bobby turned back to Calvin. Listen, old-timer, we're in charge of this vessel now. We want no trouble if we can help it. You got a radio on board? Coast Guard contact? Where's your money? Where's the gear? Speak up or I can make things real unpleasant. Calvin gave a dry little laugh. You're welcome to look around. There's not much money in fish these days. But I suspect you're not after a handful of small bills, are you? From the corridor, Delilah's voice drifted down. Hey, we got Coast Guard chatter on the old radio. Not sure if it's working properly. The speaker's fizzling in and out. You want me to kill it? Yeah, Bobby called back. And keep watch up there. Let us know if any boat approaches. He returned his attention to Calvin. We've got this boat now, old man. It's ours. Calvin raised an eyebrow. Does that mean you'll let me go? Errol answered by pointing his machete at Calvin's throat. Not a chance. You're staying right where we can keep an eye on you. So you say others came and tied you up? Then they left you here. Calvin gave a small shrug that caused the rope around his shoulders to shift. Better than them throwing me overboard. Don't worry, fellas, I'm not planning on any heroics. I'm just the harmless fisherman. The older man's tone had just enough mockery that Bobby felt uneasy. But from all appearances, the occupant was no threat. The ropes binding him looked secure enough. It would do for now. Let's search the rest of this tub, Bobby said, turning to Errol. If the old man's telling the truth, the others might have run off with the valuables already. If not, we'll strip it for parts or scuttle it. Doesn't matter. We got bigger fish to fry after tonight. Errol turned to Calvin again. You sure you're alone? Calvin's lips curved in a sly grin. See for yourself. Chapter 2, An Unsettling Discovery. Up on the deck, Delilah and Darren rummaged through the storage areas, the cabin, anywhere that valuables might be kept. Delilah found some locked compartments but no obvious stash of cash. She pried open a couple of locked boxes and found only spare spark plugs, fishing knives, flares, first aid supplies, nothing special. Darren peered through the small kitchen-like area and sleeping berth. He found a framed photograph on a shelf above the bunk bed, a younger man in marine fatigues standing next to a helicopter. He squinted at the face, noticing the same determined jaw and short hair. The resemblance to the captive in the hold was obvious. Hey, Delilah, he called quietly. Looks like that old man was a Marine. See this? She snatched the photo from him, flicked on her flashlight, and examined it. You sure? Looks like him, right? Just younger. Delilah gave a slight shrug. So what if he was a Marine? That was probably forever ago. Marines retire, or get out, or whatever. It doesn't mean we're in trouble. Let's keep looking. Still, Darren felt a twinge of unease. A seasoned Marine who survived who knows what might not be so easy to handle. Then again, the man was tied up securely. Probably. We gotta tell Bobby, Darren murmured. Go ahead, Delilah said dismissively. I'll be up top, making sure no do-gooders are around. Darren nodded and headed below. He found Bobby and Errol rummaging through compartments while LT lingered in the pilot house overhead, presumably messing with the radio. Darren tapped Bobby's shoulder and showed him the photo. Bobby glowered at the picture. You telling me that old coot's a Marine? Looks that way, Darren said. Should we be worried? Bobby looked unconvinced. He's tied up, Darren. A Marine's not a superhero. They can bleed and beg just like the rest of us. Don't let an old photo spook you. We've got guns. He doesn't. Errol let out a low chuckle. If anything, that means we have leverage. A tough guy's pride can be used against him. Let's go see if we can scare some better info out of him. Maybe he's hiding something. They entered the storage hold again. The older man was in the same position, eyes closed now as if dozing off. Bobby gave the man a little shove with the toe of his boot. Rise and shine, Marine, he growled. We know your secret. Calvin's eyes opened slowly. A hint of surprise flickered there. You do. We found your picture, Bobby snapped, waving it in his face. Ex-Marine, right? Calvin stared at the photo, the corners of his mouth tugging downward in a faint grimace. That's me. Once upon a time, yeah. Errol cracked his knuckles. You might as well come clean. Marines usually have a stash of gear or a piece to protect themselves. Where is it? Calvin turned his gaze toward the crate in the corner. Errol's eyes followed. He stepped toward the box, rummaged through it. It held a few personal items, a small set of dog tags, a broken watch. No sign of a gun. "You messing with me, old man?" Errol hissed. Calvin shook his head. "I told you there's nothing worth stealing here." "Tell us anyway," Bobby said, leaning in menacingly. "We're not leaving empty-handed." Calvin's eyes flickered around the cramped space, a hint of amusement dancing beneath the surface. "Wouldn't you like to know?" he murmured. "If there's anything of value on this boat, it's not something you'll find rummaging around in crates." Errol's upper lip curled. "Don't get clever." He raised a fist. "You better talk straight or I'll carve the answer out of you." To Darren's surprise, the older man didn't look scared. If anything, he looked bored, like he'd seen worse threats in his day. That alone made the hair on the back of Darren's neck stand up. He inched backward, not wanting to be in immediate range if something went sideways. Bobby grabbed the man's collar. "You got hidden compartments or not?" "Maybe," Calvin said. "But if you're looking for some big payday, you'll be disappointed." A sudden shout erupted from the corridor. "Bobby, get up here." It was Delilah's voice, urgent and sharp. "We got a big boat on the horizon and it's headed this way." Bobby swore under his breath. Errol looked to him. "Could be Coast Guard," Errol said. "Or the other pirates that left him behind," Bobby said sarcastically, though a flicker of nervousness played in his eyes. He turned to Calvin. "You said you were boarded by others. Where are they now?" Calvin only said, "If you're lucky, they're not coming back." That infuriated Bobby. He grabbed the older man by the hair, yanking his head back. "I'll deal with you soon," he growled. Then he motioned to Errol and Darren. "Let's check the deck." They hustled out, leaving Calvin behind in the flickering light of the storage hold. If they had time, they might have noticed something peculiar. The rope coiled around his wrist had begun to loosen, as if the knot had never been as secure as it appeared. Chapter 3. Another threat on the water. Delilah stood at the boat's edge, binoculars pressed to her eyes. A small but more powerful boat glided toward them from the southeast, lights off, though there was a faint illumination on the deck that gave away its size. It was bigger than their speedboat but sleeker than a standard fishing trawler. She could make out shapes on the deck, at least half a dozen men from what it looked like. "Not Coast Guard," she muttered. "Could be more pirates. Or a private security boat. Hard to tell." LT, the smooth-talking one, joined her. "Any idea if they spotted us?" Delilah passed him the binoculars. "They're heading this way, no question. Might be the same creeps that tied up that old man. We better get out of here or get ready for a fight." Bobby and Errol arrived on deck, Darren in tow. Errol frowned deeply. "We can't outrun them in that old speedboat if they've got a bigger engine." "Maybe the Pelican's fortune can outrun him," Darren offered lamely, though the idea was obviously ridiculous. A battered old fishing trawler had no chance outrunning a high-powered craft. LT looked around with a scowl. "We might just hide. Kill the lights, see if they pass." Delilah shook her head. "Our boat is bigger than a bread box. We can't hide from a high-tech or well-trained group. If they have night vision or advanced radar, they already know we're here." Bobby let out a disgusted sigh. "We can hold them off, or at least we can threaten to shoot. But if they're armed to the teeth, it might not go well." Errol patted his machete. "I say we shoot first, ask questions later." A tense debate quickly sprang up. Darren's heart rate spiked, and he found himself glancing over to the hold door where the old man was kept. He couldn't say why, but something in him wanted to run down and double-check their hostage. He realized, though, that he was the least important figure here. The others were discussing whether to fight or flee, and they might not take kindly to Darren meddling. Finally, Delilah, who was effectively second in command after Bobby, looked at them all and said, "Fine. We test the waters. Bobby, Errol, you get eyes on them with your weapons ready. If they get close, we warn them off. If they try to board or fire on us, we defend ourselves." She turned to Darren. "You watch the old man. Make sure he stays put." Darren nodded, scurrying toward the hold. As he slipped down the narrow corridor, flicking on his flashlight, he thought he heard the old man whistling. It was a soft, tuneless melody that made the hairs on the back of Darren's neck stand up. Something about that casual whistling, while bound and alone in the dark, felt off. The moment Darren opened the door to the storage hold, the whistling ceased. Calvin, still in the same place, raised his eyes. "You folks have some new visitors?" Darren frowned. "We're the ones asking the questions around here." "Sure," Calvin said mildly. "Sure. Let me guess, you're the kid of the group. The least experienced." They left you to guard me because they didn't think you'd be much help in a real scrap. A flash of anger surged through Darren. Shut up, he snapped, though inside he knew it was true. He was the greenhorn, the one they only half trusted. The old man's words pricked at his ego. Calvin leaned forward as much as the ropes allowed. Don't let them treat you like that, he said in a low voice, his tone almost friendly. A man's gotta prove himself. That's the only way to earn respect. Darren swallowed. I will, he retorted. Keep your mouth shut. Another distant beep from above made Darren glance back at the corridor. He heard shouting. It was muffled, but he picked out Bobby's voice, sounding angry and loud. Could the approaching boat have fired a warning shot? Darren's pulse spiked. He wanted to run up there and see for himself. But he had his orders. Keep the old man under guard. Returning his attention to Calvin, Darren noticed something that spiked fresh alarm. The rope around the older man's ankles looked looser than before. Not fully undone, but definitely slack. Darren stepped closer, shining the flashlight on the knot. Were you messing with the rope? Calvin shrugged. Hard to do when I'm all tied up. Darren crouched, feeling the rope. The knot was definitely looser. Darren yanked it tighter even as the older man sighed and let it happen. You messing with me, old man? Darren demanded, forcing his voice to sound more menacing. If you try anything, I'll shoot. Of course you will, Calvin said gently. You've got the power. Something about those words, so mild, so calm, unsettled Darren all over again. The way this man carried himself, like the ropes didn't truly hold him. Darren felt an involuntary shiver. He stood up, training the flashlight on Calvin's face. Stay put, he ordered shakily, then stepped back into the corridor, leaving the door cracked open to keep an ear out. He'd watch from just outside to keep distance in case the old man tried something. He told himself it was a smart move. Chapter 4, Shots Fired. On the deck, chaos was unfolding. Through the gloom, the other boat was nearly upon them. A sharp burst of gunfire rattled the night, warning shots from the approaching vessel. Bobby and Errol ducked behind whatever cover they could find. Delilah swore, returning a burst of gunfire from her own submachine gun. She aimed high, sending a volley across the water. LT crouched near the pilot house, trying to hail them via the boat's radio. We don't want trouble, he called out. Don't shoot. He reasoned that maybe these were men who could be bought off or negotiated with. But the only response was another hail of bullets that thunked into the hull of the Pelican's Fortune. A pained roar from the opposite deck signaled that Delilah's wild gunfire had indeed hit someone. The pirates on the other boat grew more aggressive. This is a fiasco. Bobby yelled over the din, they're better armed than we are. Another bullet tore through the cabin window, shattering glass. Errol bared his teeth. We can't stay in the open. We gotta get out of here. But fleeing in the trawler was near impossible. The engine needed time to start up and spool. Their small speedboat was tied to the side but also within easy line of fire from the other boat. The Gulf pirates found themselves pinned, exchanging desperate gunshots in the dark, each muzzle flash revealing glimpses of frightened faces. In the corridor below deck, Darren felt the boat shudder. The thunder of gunfire made his ears ring. He could hear shouting from his crewmates. Fear squeezed his chest. Should he go up and help them? Or stay put, protecting their captive? He inched toward the hold door again, pushing it open. Calvin was still tied up, though Darren could see the man's wrists flexing slightly against the rope. Despite that slight movement, Calvin wore an expression of complete calm. Gunfire overhead, chaos swirling, and the older man looked more curious than afraid. Darren's voice trembled. What are you smiling at? Calvin paused, then said, I'm just thinking about how your night is about to get a whole lot worse. Darren aimed the pistol at the older man's head. Shut up. His voice cracked. Don't move. Calvin merely stared, unwavering. There's still time for you to get off this boat. If you let me go, maybe I can help. But if you stay, well, you might end up just like the others. Dead in the water. Before Darren could respond, a massive jolt rocked the vessel. The Pelican's Fortune had just been rammed by the other boat. Darren stumbled backward, losing his balance. He heard a splintering crunch somewhere near the bow. Shouts rang out from the deck. Delilah and Bobby were screaming curses. Another volley of gunshots hammered at the hull. They're boarding. Bobby's shout echoed down. They're coming aboard. Panic stabbed Darren's heart. If another group of pirates boarded them, he was the only one below deck, separated from the rest. He had to choose. Stay and guard the old man, or rush up to fight at his crewmate's side. His shaking hand gripped the pistol. Calvin remained motionless, eyes calculating. Darren made a split-second decision. He shut the hold door, locked it from the outside with a sliding bolt, and hurried up the steps toward the deck, leaving Calvin behind. Chapter 5: Tides of Violence. Above deck, the fight was in full swing. The attacking boat had latched on, men in black jumped across, brandishing assault rifles. A flurry of muzzle flashes lit the night. Bobby took a shot to his left shoulder, howling in pain. Delilah ducked behind a metal crate, firing in short bursts, but her aim was off in the darkness. LT cowered near the pilot house door, pressing the radio's mic to his lips in a desperate attempt to call for help. Errol, machete in one hand and pistol in the other, raged forward, ignoring the hail of bullets. Darren emerged onto the deck just in time to see Errol slash across one attacker's arm, eliciting a spurt of blood. The attacker reeled back, but another fired a round into Errol's thigh. With a cry, Errol dropped to a knee. The deck was slick with saltwater, blood, and spent casings. Darren's stomach twisted in horror. He raised his pistol and fired blindly into the night. One of the attackers, a tall, broad man wearing a dark tactical vest, turned toward Darren. The muzzle of his rifle flashed. Darren yelped and dove behind a crate. Bullets tore splinters out of the deck. The stench of gunpowder filled his nostrils. Behind him, Bobby was staggering, clutching his wounded shoulder. Delilah was pinned down, exchanging panicked shouts with LT. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and cornered. No chance to run. The best they could do was to try to hold the deck. But that was a losing proposition. Their foes advanced in disciplined formation, spreading out to flank. In that moment, Darren recalled the old man's words, "If you let me go, maybe I can help." A crazy notion flickered in Darren's mind. Was it possible that the old man, ex-Marine or not, could turn the tide somehow? A second jolt rocked the boat. The new attackers had thrown grappling lines and were forcibly dragging the Pelican's fortune closer. If these new pirates or mercenaries, whoever they were, gained full control of the deck, Darren and his group would be dead or captured. Another burst of gunfire forced Darren to flatten himself. Fear hammered in his chest. Sweat stung his eyes. Then he made a choice. He crawled toward the stairwell, ignoring Bobby's cry, "Darren, get back here," and slipped below deck, heart pounding. He had to find the old man. Maybe it was a fool's errand, but in this moment it seemed like the only option. Because if they didn't do something drastic, the attackers would kill them all. Chapter 6: The Marine Gunner Revealed. Darren stumbled down the corridor to the hold. The boat pitched beneath him as bullets struck the deck overhead. He unlocked the door, breath ragged. Inside, the overhead light flickered. Calvin sat where he had been left, though now the ropes around his wrists looked even looser. Darren pointed the gun at him, voice shaking. "Look, old man, we're all about to die unless we find a way out of this. You said you could help. That was real, right? You know how to fight." Calvin's gaze was cool, measuring. "Kid, you have no idea the things I've done." Slowly, very slowly, he flexed his arms and the rope around his wrists fell away. Darren let out a stifled gasp. "Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. Not unless you point that pistol at me for too long." He motioned with one hand. "Let me see it?" Darren blinked. "See what?" "The pistol," Calvin said calmly. He pointed at Darren's trembling hand. "You want me to help, right? So hand it over." Stunned, Darren lowered the weapon, taking an unconscious step forward. Some part of him thought, "Are you insane?" But under the older man's penetrating stare, Darren found himself obeying. He extended the pistol. Calvin took it, checking the magazine. One bullet was missing from earlier. "Not much, but it'll do," Calvin murmured. Another explosion of gunfire overhead made them both look up. Darren's nerves were a jangled mess. "We're outnumbered. They're all gonna die up there." Calvin tested his ankle ropes. With a single yank, he pulled his feet free. The ropes had been manipulated into a loose knot that only looked secure. He rolled his shoulders, wincing slightly, then stood facing Darren. The expression on the Marine's face was something new, focused, lethal. Darren had seen tough guys in his group, but they all paled before the calm, determined aura of this older man. Calvin quickly scanned the storage area. "We might have a chance if we can pick them off from vantage points." He moved past Darren, heading for a crate in the corner. He rummaged through it, pulled out a battered green ammo box. Opening it, he revealed a disassembled rifle, an older model M14, from the look of it wrapped in oilcloth. Darren stared in amazement. "This might help," Calvin said with quiet confidence, swiftly assembling the weapon. I always keep a contingency plan, even when I fish. Darren's eyes darted around. You had a gun hidden? Why didn't you use it when we boarded you? Calvin's lips curved into a faint, humorless smile. I was waiting to see what you wanted. If you'd been kinder, maybe we could have avoided violence. Then again, you idiots gave me the chance to see what you were made of. Obviously, you're in over your heads. He locked the final piece of the rifle in place, tested the bolt, loaded a mag from the ammo box. You said you wanted my help, so get behind me and do exactly as I say. Darren swallowed. Yeah, okay. Calvin grabbed a small satchel of extra mags and slung it over his shoulder. The older man then turned to Darren. You said there are 5 of you in total, right? Darren nodded. Me, Bobby, Delilah, Errol, and LT. Are they all above deck? Yeah. Bobby and Errol are shot. Delilah and LT might still be okay. I'm not sure. The older man's face hardened. Listen carefully. I'm not rescuing them for their sake. I'm doing it because I won't let these other scumbags steal my boat. Then, once the dust settles, you and your buddies better run. Because if you ever threaten me again, he paused, letting the unspoken threat linger. Darren gave a shaky nod. Understood. With that, Calvin started up the ladder, rifle in hand, not even waiting for the younger man to follow. Darren took a breath and scrambled behind him. Chapter 7. Turn of the Tide. Up on deck, the new attackers had begun to overrun the boat. 3 or 4 men in black tactical gear crouched near the bow, exchanging fire with Delilah, who was trapped behind a coil of rope. She was desperately popping up to fire short bursts, trying not to get pinned. Bobby leaned against the pilot house bulkhead, clutching his bleeding shoulder, breathing hard. LT was nowhere to be seen, and Errol lay face down, unmoving near the port side. A tall, bald mercenary advanced, weapon-trained. "Surrender!" he shouted, his voice carrying over the crackle of gunfire. "Drop your weapons or you all die." Delilah grit her teeth, exchanging a glance with Bobby. They were cornered. Maybe it was time to surrender. She began to lift her arms in a gesture of submission. But at that exact moment, a sharp, echoing crack rang out, distinct from the staccato bursts of submachine gun fire. A single rifle shot, loaded with precision. The tall mercenary's head snapped back. He went down in a heap, rifle clattering to the deck. Another figure in black turned, eyes wide, searching for the source. The muzzle of a newly appeared M14 barked again. The second mercenary fell, a neat hole punched through his chest. The deck erupted in chaos. The remaining attackers spun around, forced to take cover behind the boat's meager structures. Delilah blinked in astonishment. She saw an older man with silver hair, still wearing the same worn shirt and cargo pants, advancing calmly with a rifle in hand. Beside him was Darren, who looked positively terrified. "Who the—" Delilah started, but she quickly realized. "That's the man we tied up. The fisherman. The Marine." She stared, mouth open. Calvin Reed advanced with the poise of a soldier who'd done this countless times. He moved from cover to cover, firing methodical shots. Each bullet found its mark or pinned an opponent so the pirates could not return accurate fire. The deck's floodlights sparked and died from stray rounds, plunging everything into near darkness. But Calvin moved with confidence, as though he could sense the environment better than the attackers. One mercenary tried to pop up at starboard with an Uzi. Calvin snapped the rifle to that side, squeezed the trigger. Another threat down. In a matter of seconds, he had turned a losing battle into something else entirely. Delilah recovered from shock enough to lob a few covering shots with her submachine gun. She hollered to Bobby, "We got a chance." Bobby grit his teeth, aimed his shotgun around the corner, and fired. One attacker let out a scream, hitting the deck. The morale of the boarding party buckled under this sudden shift. A figure emerged from the mercenaries' boat, shouting, "Fall back! Damn it! Fall back!" Another volley of rifle fire from Calvin forced them to retreat. Bodies lay sprawled on the Pelican's Fortune's deck. Streams of blood dripped over the sides, painting the brackish Gulf water. The surviving attackers jumped back to their own craft. An engine revved. Despite a few parting shots, it sounded like they were cutting their losses and fleeing. From behind his cover, LT finally reappeared. A bullet grazed across his temple. He had been pinned down but not out. Delilah crouched, still panting, scanning the deck. They're leaving? She asked. Bobby coughed. That crazy old man. He saved us. He sounded half in shock, half furious that they had needed saving in the first place. Calvin stepped out, scanning the water with the rifle's sights. No emotion on his face. Darren followed him, pistol in hand, though he had not fired a single shot. His cheeks were flushed, adrenaline surging. For a tense moment, they all watched the black craft fade into the darkness, engine growling as it fled the area. Calvin lowered his rifle, glancing over the deck. Delilah stared at him in awe and fear, uncertain what to say. Bobby, wounded, glowered at the older man, uncomprehending. Meanwhile, the wounded Errol stirred, letting out a low groan. LT pressed a hand to his scalp. Blood trickled down his fingers. Darren swallowed hard. We beat them. Calvin exhaled a long breath. They're gone for now. Might come back with reinforcements, though. We should get you all patched up and get my boat out of here. He started toward Errol to check if the man was alive, pausing only when Delilah leveled her submachine gun at him. Hold it, she said in a wavering voice. You're not giving the orders here, old man. Calvin didn't look threatened. He raised an eyebrow as if to say, really, you're gonna try that now? Bobby, wincing in pain, barked, Delilah, put it down. He glared at Calvin. Much as I hate to say it, we owe him. He saved our asses. Delilah hesitated, then lowered her weapon. LT tried to stand, blinking as blood trickled from his grazed wound. We can't let him just take the boat, he muttered. Calvin's tone was crisp. It's my boat, pal, and you're only alive right now because I decided to keep you that way. LT bristled but said nothing. Chapter 8. A Fragile Truce. The deck was littered with bodies. 3 men in black gear lay motionless, one half hanging off the side. Errol was alive but badly wounded in the thigh. The boat's rail was splintered and the cabin window shattered. Bobby's shoulder bled heavily, and he cradled his arm against his torso. Darren and Delilah seemed mostly unscathed, though shaken. LT had a shallow scalp wound. Calvin Reed, who had come up from captivity not 5 minutes before, was the only one unhurt. He set his rifle against the rail. In one fluid motion, he grabbed the nearest corpse by the vest and heaved it overboard. The body splashed into the Gulf. We can't stay here, Calvin said calmly. We're all going to patch up, get the engine running, and get to a safer harbor. Bobby staggered, leaning against the pilot house. If you think we're taking orders from, you'll do as I say, Calvin snapped, turning sharply, or you'll bleed out right here. We're in my domain, understand? I know these waters, I know this boat, and now I'm the only one with a working rifle that has ammo. If you want to survive, shut up and cooperate. There was a tense silence. Delilah's expression flickered between fury and grudging agreement. He's got a point, Bobby, she said. We can't do anything for ourselves if we're all dead. And that other group might come back, Darren added quietly. They had bigger guns, more men. If they call in reinforcements, we're toast. Bobby spat a wad of blood. Fine, he muttered. We'll follow you to safety. Then we'll talk. Calvin nodded, assessing each of them. Darren, search these bodies, see if there's anything useful. Ammo, medical supplies, whatever. Delilah, you help me get Errol below so we can stop that bleeding. LT, see if you can get the engine started. Don't go anywhere else. And Bobby, don't try anything stupid. They set to work with grim efficiency. The deck was slick, the boat rocking. Darren grimaced as he picked through the attacker's gear. Mostly small arms, a few submachine guns, some spare magazines, though not matching the caliber of Calvin's M14. He found a small first aid kit on one of them, took it. Down below, Calvin and Delilah carried Errol to the small sleeping berth. Errol gritted his teeth, pain etched on his face. "Don't you let me die, you old bastard," he hissed, half delirious. Calvin gave him a deadpan look. "I'll do what I can." He rummaged in his own supply kit, pulling out bandages and antiseptic. Delilah hovered, uncertain, her eyes still flickering with distrust. "Press down here," Calvin instructed, placing her hand on the wound. "Keep pressure on it." She did so, though her lips twitched as if she wanted to cuss him out. "Why are you helping us?" she finally asked. "We tied you up. We threatened you." Calvin kept working. "I've seen enough killing in my life. If I can avoid more by patching you up, I will. Doesn't mean I forgive your little stunt, though." He pressed gauze on the wound, eliciting a pained moan from Errol. "Besides, I want you healthy enough that you can face the consequences of trying to steal my boat." "Consequences?" she echoed, eyes narrowing. Calvin didn't elaborate. Instead, he finished wrapping the bandage. "That'll hold for now. The bullets lodged inside. When we get back to shore, you'll need a real doctor. I'm no medic." Outside, they heard the rumble of an engine turning over, sputtering. LT must have had some mechanical know-how, because the Pelican's Fortune's engine coughed to life. Calvin stepped out, Delilah at his heels, to see Bobby lurching toward the pilot house. The wounded man was still defiant, but at least he wasn't brandishing a weapon. They needed Calvin's assistance more than they cared to admit. Chapter 9. Flight from the Gulf. With the engine running, the Pelican's Fortune began to chug forward, leaving the drifting black speedboat behind. Darren had discovered it riddled with bullet holes, the motor shot up, practically useless. Their own smaller boat was still afloat, but it wouldn't hold them all, especially the wounded, not if that other group returned. So, they set out with the old fishing trawler, battered though it was, heading north along the coastline to find a safe harbor or at least a hidden bayou to shelter in until dawn. Calvin took the helm. He flicked switches and turned knobs with practiced ease, ignoring Bobby's sullen glare from the corner. Delilah hovered near the door, her submachine gun now slung over her shoulder. LT leaned against the wall, radio in hand, occasionally calling out coordinates to keep them on a safe path. Errol had been laid out in the bunk below, sedated as best they could manage with some leftover painkillers. Darren busied himself coiling rope, retrieving the few items that had scattered across the deck. He was still reeling from the whirlwind of events. Night pressed around them, a black tapestry of stars overhead. Every splash of the water felt ominous. They had no idea if the attackers were trailing them at a distance, waiting for a second chance. Tension clung to the boat. Even though Calvin was temporarily in charge, the pirates watched him with suspicion. Would he turn on them once they were out of danger? Calvin stared ahead, a distant glimmer in his eyes. "We should be at an inlet in a few hours," he said to Delilah, who was closest. "We can hide there until morning. Maybe slip out after sunrise and head to a real port for medical help." Delilah nodded stiffly. "Sounds good." In the corner, Bobby snorted. "All we got is your word on that." He winced as a jolt of pain shot through his shoulder. Calvin turned his head slightly. "If I wanted you dead, I'd let you bleed out. Don't tempt me to change my mind." An uneasy quiet settled. Outside, the darkness swallowed them. Chapter 10. Old Wounds, New Tensions. A soft drizzle began to fall, pattering on the deck. Bobby had retreated below to find some form of comfort, rummaging for pain meds. Delilah hovered near the pilot house, restless. LT crouched by the radio console, scanning frequencies. Darren lingered near the steps, glancing periodically at Calvin. The older man's presence was unnerving, a quiet authority that overshadowed them all. "Marines," Delilah said at length, as if picking up a conversation thread. "When did you serve?" Calvin's jaw tightened. "A long time ago." She wanted to pry more but sensed it would be unwelcome. Instead, she said, "We're not the only ones who do this, you know. Piracy, smuggling. The Gulf's full of small-time criminals. You must have run into trouble before." "You have no idea," Calvin muttered. Memories flickered across his hardened face. "That group tonight, though, they're not just small-time. The gear they had, someone's bankrolling them." Delilah frowned. "You think so?" Calvin nodded. "One of them had armor plating you don't usually see on average mercenaries. I'm betting a well-funded group is behind them." He gave her a meaningful glance. "Means you might be messing with bigger fish than you can handle." She shifted uneasily. "We don't normally have that problem." He gave a mirthless chuckle. "Lucky for you, I'm not in a killing mood. Otherwise, I'd have fed you to the fish days ago." Silence fell again. Delilah, at a loss for words, watched the storm clouds swirl overhead. Below deck, Bobby rummaged for anything to dull the pain. LT joined him, quietly trying to check the seriousness of the wound. Errol was stable for the moment, though the entire left side of his pant leg was soaked in blood. Darren, having heard the conversation about a well-funded group, felt his stomach twist. He approached Calvin, voice hushed. "That means they might come after us again, right? If they're financed, they won't just give up." Calvin glanced at him. "You in a hurry to get away?" "Yeah," Darren admitted. "I don't want to die out here." "Then you should have thought about that before hijacking an old man's fishing boat." Calvin turned back to the helm. "Don't worry, kid. If they come back, they'll have a fight on their hands." Darren felt a mixture of relief and fear. This Marine was clearly capable, but how far would he go to protect his own boat? Would he eventually cut them loose or turn them in to the authorities? Chapter 11. A suspicious vessel. Hours passed. The drizzle intensified into a steady rain, the wind picking up. The Pelican's fortune trudged northward, engine laboring. The battered hull hissed through the waves. Then, LT spotted something on the radar. A faint blip, about a mile off to port, matching their course. "There's a vessel parallel to us," LT muttered. "Could be nothing." Calvin frowned, easing off the throttle. "Or it could be them." He turned to Darren. "Go below, see if Bobby can move. We might need more eyes on deck." Darren rushed off. He found Bobby leaning against a bunk, cursing as he tried to shift his arm into a sling. "We might have trouble," Darren said, breathless. "There's a boat following us." Bobby cursed again. "Fine, help me up." They managed to get him onto his feet. He clutched a small pistol in his good hand. "Let's see if I can still shoot straight." Delilah was already on deck with binoculars, scanning the horizon. The rain made it tough, but she could see a faint glow from the direction LT had indicated. "I can't tell who it is," she said through clenched teeth. "No radio contact." Calvin adjusted the helm. "We'll change heading, see if they follow. If they do, we'll assume it's trouble." He turned the wheel, guiding the Pelican's fortune in a wide arc toward an inlet. The radar beeped softly as the unknown vessel changed course, keeping pace. That was all the confirmation they needed. Another wave of tension gripped them. The battered group had used much of their ammo. Calvin still had some rifle rounds, Delilah some submachine gun mags, Darren's pistol was half full, and Bobby had maybe a couple of shots in the small .38 he found. LT was unarmed, aside from a knife. Errol was incapacitated. They were in no condition for a major firefight, and yet the threat was closing in. "We gotta hide," Darren suggested desperately. "Isn't there some swampy channel or something we can slip into?" Calvin nodded grimly. "We're heading for it. There's a labyrinth of bayous up ahead. I know them well enough to navigate. If we can get in, we might shake them. Chapter 12. Into the bayou. They pushed into the mouth of a winding channel. The vegetation thickened, cypress trees looming. The muddy water was narrower, and the boat's draft threatened to scrape the bottom. Calvin piloted slowly, searching for a deeper route. Rain hammered the deck, creating a hazy curtain of droplets. The unknown vessel behind them was forced to slow as well, but it still showed up on the radar, creeping closer. Branches scraped the hull. In the gloom, moss-draped trees hung overhead. The putrid smell of marshland rose around them. The boat's spotlight, broken during the firefight, was useless, leaving them mostly reliant on a single front light. Visibility was poor, tension high. Bobby sat near the pilot house, pistol in hand, glaring out into the night. Delilah paced. Darren stood behind Calvin, anxious. LT watched the radar. Errol remained unconscious below. For a time, it seemed the labyrinth might protect them. The channel forked in multiple directions, and Calvin guided the boat carefully, sometimes cutting the engine to drift silently past thick vegetation. They huddled in near darkness, stifling their breathing, listening for any sign of pursuit. Then, from behind them came the faint echo of an engine. Not the roar of a large craft, but a smaller outboard motor. The unknown vessel had deployed a smaller skiff to track them through the bayou. Calvin let out a low curse. "They're not giving up." Bobby tensed. "We set an ambush then." He raised his pistol. "They come around a bend. We blow him away." Delilah frowned. "We've got half our group wounded. That might not go so well." Calvin's gaze swept over them. "Sometimes the best solution is to slip away, not fight. Let's keep moving. We might find a channel they can't navigate." They pushed deeper, guided by the ghostly silhouettes of cypress knees poking from the water. Every so often, the smaller boat behind them would make a noise, forcing them to turn down a different path. But the watery labyrinth wasn't easy to traverse. Twice, the Pelican's fortune nearly ran aground, forcing them to reverse and find a deeper route. Each misstep gave the pursuers time to close in. Finally, they reached a small clearing of open water, ringed by high trees. LT studied the radar. "They're close, maybe a few hundred yards behind. Should be visible any minute now." Calvin killed the engine. The boat drifted forward, momentum carrying them. The only sounds were the patter of rain and the clinking of loose equipment on deck. They all took up positions. Bobby crouched behind a crate, ignoring the throbbing in his shoulder. Delilah found a vantage near the side rail. Darren held onto the pistol, heart hammering. Calvin quietly readied the rifle. If the pursuers emerged from the narrow channel, they'd have a few seconds for a shot. The tension was palpable, every breath feeling too loud. The gloom was nearly absolute. Lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the ancient cypress for a split second. Then darkness again. A faint hum of an outboard motor approached. Closer, closer. They waited, each second an eternity. Then the front of a small skiff glided into view, just beyond the opening of the clearing. Dim lights on the skiff's bow revealed 3 men crouched low. One had a rifle, another brandished a shotgun. The third piloted the craft. They spotted the Pelican's fortune bobbing in the middle of the clearing. A shout rang out. The man with the shotgun fired off a round, pellets rattling on the fishing boat's hull. Bobby barked a curse, returning fire. Gunshots echoed across the swamp, birds fluttering overhead. Delilah joined in, muzzle flashing in the darkness. One of the men on the skiff went down, but the other 2 scrambled to the sides, using the edges of the boat as cover. Calvin carefully lined up a shot, ignoring the chaos. He breathed, squeezed the trigger. The pilot jerked, slumping over the motor. The skiff spun in a lazy circle, engine revving. The remaining man tried to jump into the water, but Delilah caught him with a burst of gunfire. His scream was cut short by a splash. The small skiff lurched, driverless, spinning in place. Calvin remained focused, scanning for more threats. Satisfied, he lowered the rifle. "Looks like that group is neutralized," he said, voice grim. Bobby exhaled, lowering his pistol. "You're a piece of work, old man." Delilah flicked sweat and rain from her brow. "Think that was all of them?" Calvin shrugged. "Hard to say. The main boat might still be out there. But for now, we've lost them or at least put a serious dent in their plan." LT, breathing heavily, peered at the skiff. "We could salvage that boat. Or at least see if they have any supplies." Calvin nodded. "Darren, you're the least banged up. Take a line and grab that skiff. We'll see if it's useful." Darren swallowed, stepping to the rail. He grabbed a rope, launched it toward the skiff as it spun near. After 2 attempts, the rope caught on the small boat's cleat. Carefully, Darren pulled it closer. A single body slumped in the skiff, a bullet hole in his chest. Darren tried not to look too closely at the glassy eyes. With a heavy gulp, he rifled through the dead man's pockets, retrieving a set of keys, a small flashlight, and some loose ammo. "Nothing too special here," Darren reported, voice shaking. "The boat's an outboard. Looks like a decent motor, gas tanks half full." Calvin stepped closer, shining his own flashlight. "We might use this to scout ahead. The Pelican's fortune can't maneuver well in shallow channels. But we can't all fit in this skiff, especially with Errol wounded." Delilah chewed her lip, anxious. "What's the plan?" The older man thought for a moment. "We anchor here, hidden among the trees. Then 1 or 2 of us take the skiff, see if there's a route out that doesn't pass the main boat, assuming it's still out there. Meanwhile, the rest patch the hull and look after the wounded." He paused, scanning their faces. "If we find a safe path, we come back, guide this boat through. If not, we might have to abandon ship." Bobby scoffed. "I didn't do all this to not get out of here with our hide intact. Let's just be quick about it." "Who's going?" Darren asked, though he guessed the answer. Calvin leveled a gaze at him. "You and me, kid. You seem to have half a brain in your head, and you're not crippled." Darren's heart jumped. He cast a quick look at Delilah, who shrugged. "Fine, you go. We'll guard the boat." Bobby gave Darren a sharp look, as if to say don't trust him. But Darren ignored it, focusing on the immediate need for survival. Calvin was the only one who seemed to know these waters well enough to navigate. If following him was the only chance of escaping, Darren would take it. Chapter 13. Into the Unknown. They secured the Pelican's fortune near a tangle of cypress roots, tying it off so it wouldn't drift. LT and Delilah remained on deck, weapons at the ready, scanning for signs of the main hostile boat. Bobby stayed below, nursing his shoulder and glaring at the shadows. Errol dozed in and out of consciousness. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Calvin loaded the skiff with a small supply of water, a flashlight, spare ammo. He boarded first, then motioned for Darren to follow. The younger man climbed in, heart pounding. The small boat rocked precariously. "Stay quiet," Calvin warned. "Sound travels on the water." With that, he cranked the outboard. The motor purred to life, sounding surprisingly smooth. Darren cast one last look at the fishing trawler. In the gloom, he could see Delilah and LT watching them. The motor's hum grew, and the skiff eased away from the larger vessel, heading deeper into the swamp. The glare of the trawler's single working spotlight diminished, leaving them in near darkness. For a while, they moved in silence. The drizzle softened to a mist, curling around them like ghosts. Cypress knees jutted from the murky water, and tangles of Spanish moss dripped overhead. Occasionally, a fish jumped, startling Darren. He could feel tension thrumming in his veins. The entire place felt hostile, a watery grave waiting to happen. Beside him, Calvin guided the skiff with a steady hand. "You know these bayous by heart?" Darren whispered. "Mostly," Calvin replied. I used to hide out here sometimes after I left the Marines. Just needed a place to think. Darren eyed him curiously. Why'd you leave the Marines? The older man's eyes flickered. Honorable discharge after multiple tours. I saw enough war to last me a lifetime. Figured I'd try to live quietly. Fish. Maybe find some peace. He exhaled, scanning the black water. I guess trouble found me again. Darren pressed his lips together, uncertain how to respond. He noticed a faint scar on Calvin's neck, disappearing into the collar of his shirt. So, you're not mad at me for all this? Calvin's expression was unreadable. I'm mad, but I also see a kid who got roped into something stupid because he had no better options. Doesn't mean I'll let you walk free if you cross me again. Darren nodded slowly. Understood. I'm sorry. For everything. Calvin just grunted. Then he cut the engine, letting them drift in near silence. He listened, eyes narrowed. In the distance, they heard the faint rumble of a larger motor, maybe the main boat. The sound grew louder for a moment, then faded. Could be they're searching, Calvin said softly. We'll see if we can slip around them. They continued on, weaving through narrow channels. Darren's nerves jangled every time a branch brushed the hull. Twisted roots loomed like serpents in the water, ready to snag them. Meanwhile, the bigger threat was a potential ambush from the unknown mercenaries. Calvin turned off the outboard, using a paddle to maneuver quietly through the thickening vegetation. Eventually, they emerged into a slightly more open stretch. Darren's mind raced. Is that the route to the open gulf? It should curve around, Calvin explained. If we can follow it, we'll come out near a small inlet. From there, it's a few miles to open water. He scanned the darkness. But if the mercenaries are patrolling the outer edge, we'll see them soon. A hush fell. They glided forward, the water rippling softly. Darren took a moment to glance at the older man. Calvin's posture was so calm, so poised for action. Even with a quiet voice, there was an unmistakable intensity about him. Darren couldn't help but feel a flicker of admiration, in spite of the circumstances. Suddenly, the skiff's small spotlight, only used intermittently, caught something drifting in the water ahead, a shape bobbing. Calvin tensed, raising a hand to stop Darren from speaking. He flicked the light again, revealing a body. It was face down, wearing black tactical gear, possibly one of the men from the earlier fight. The corpse was riddled with bullet holes. Darren swallowed. They must have been scouting these channels. Calvin nodded grimly. Looks like they ran into something worse than us. Confusion knit Darren's brow. Worse than us. With a gentle nudge of the paddle, Calvin turned the body over. The face was contorted in a silent scream. Darren shuddered. The bullet holes were consistent with a firefight, but the man's vest was shredded as if by something else. Knives or an alligator's jaws. Hard to tell. Suddenly, the bayou felt even less friendly. Could be gators got him after he died, Calvin said. Either way, we keep moving. He flipped the body back, letting it drift away. They pressed on in tense silence. The sense of danger escalated with every ripple in the water. If that mercenary group was still out here, they weren't alone in the dark. Calvin turned on the outboard motor once again, set to its lowest throttle, so they crept forward almost imperceptibly. Darren peered into the blackness, half expecting to see a line of men with guns drawn at any turn. Instead, they rounded a bend and spotted a faint glow from a lantern on shore, a small wooden shack perched on stilts. Calvin cut the motor once more, letting them drift closer. I know this place, he murmured. Local trapper used to live here, might still. He guided the skiff toward the rickety pier out front, motioning for Darren to keep quiet. The younger man's heart hammered. Calvin hopped out, tying the skiff. Then he raised his rifle, scanning the shack with a practiced eye. The door stood ajar, a flicker of lantern light visible inside. Without a word, Calvin stepped onto the porch, Darren behind him. The boards creaked. A smell of damp rot and fish guts permeated the air. Calvin poked the door with the rifle barrel. "Anyone here?" he called softly. No response. He inched inside, sweeping the room. Darren followed, gun in hand. Inside, they found the lantern on a small table next to a toppled chair. A few personal belongings were scattered around, including a pair of old boots, but no sign of the occupant. Something about the scene felt off. A half-eaten meal sat on a plate, gathering flies. Calvin stepped further in, noticing muddy footprints leading out the back door. Darren spotted droplets of blood on the floor. He pointed. Calvin's eyes narrowed. "Stay close," he warned. They eased through the shack, out the back door. The footprints continued down a small slope into the water. More blood flecks. Then the trail vanished. Calvin stared at the swirling mud. Whoever was here, they left in a hurry, maybe forced out. Darren felt a chill. Another casualty of the mercenaries? Or something else? A sudden splash in the distance made them both jerk around, weapons raised. Silence. Heart thumping. Darren scanned the darkness. Calvin hissed, "No point in staying. Let's get back on the water. Check further up the channel." They returned to the skiff, the shack's lantern flickering forlornly behind them. Chapter 14, The Lost Channel. Back in the skiff, Calvin started the engine, this time pushing it a bit harder. They'd wasted enough time. The small craft zipped forward, weaving around half-submerged logs. Darren kept his eyes peeled. The swamp felt oppressive, ancient, every shadow hinting at danger. He tried to calm his pounding heart by focusing on the plan. Find a route to open water, or at least a secure passage, then return to the fishing trawler. Minutes passed. The channel narrowed again, forcing them to slow. Another bend, another tangle of roots. Then they came upon a surprising sight. A battered, partially sunken boat, another small skiff. It was wedged among the cypress, painted black, reminiscent of the gear worn by the mercenaries. Holes riddled the hull. Calvin stopped short, letting the engine idle. "Look at that," he muttered. "Someone shot it to pieces." Darren swallowed. They must have gotten into a firefight with someone else. Or maybe the occupant panicked and crashed. Calvin guided their own skiff closer, rifle at the ready. He circled around the wreck, scanning. "No bodies," he noted. "Whoever was here likely escaped or was taken." He gestured to the bullet holes. "It's consistent with a close-range attack. Likely from shore." With renewed caution, they pressed on. The deeper they went, the thicker the foliage. The cypress canopy overhead blocked what little moonlight and starlight managed to pierce the clouds. In near-total darkness, they navigated by a small map light on the console and their flashlights, always half expecting to see armed men appear. But the swamp remained eerily quiet. Finally, they reached a dead-end, solid land blocked the channel, a thick mass of fallen trees. Calvin hissed in frustration. "Damn, we'll have to double back. See if we missed a turn." Darren felt a wash of hopelessness. "This place is a maze." "Yes, it is," Calvin said quietly. He flicked off the engine. "Before we go back, let's take a minute. Maybe you can hold the flashlight while I check the map." He rummaged in a watertight bag, pulling out a folded chart. Darren held the light, trying to keep his hand steady. The older man traced a finger along a series of twisting lines. "We came in here, must have turned left at that big cypress. If we turned right, that might lead us to an old drainage canal that eventually spills out near an inlet." Darren nodded, though the lines on the map looked impossibly convoluted. "Okay, let's do it." Before they could start the engine again, a bright light suddenly speared them, shining from somewhere behind, back down the channel. Darren froze. Calvin stiffened. The unknown boat was behind them, creeping up with a spotlight that illuminated their skiff in a harsh glare. "Down!" Calvin commanded, killing the small map light. Darren flattened himself as bullets screamed overhead, punching through branches. Water splashed violently around them. This was the moment they dreaded. The mercenaries had found them. Chapter 15. Cornered in the bayou. Bullets screamed overhead, shredding branches and flinging water droplets from the swamp's surface. The glare from the unseen enemy's spotlight pinned them like fireflies under a jar. Darren flattened his body along the small skiff's hull, heart hammering so violently he could barely breathe. Calvin, crouched near the bow, pushed a hand against Darren's back to keep him low. In the devastating burst of gunfire, the oppressive hush of the bayou transformed into an echo chamber of chaos. Each bullet snapped twigs or struck water in a sharp hiss. The muzzle flashes from behind the bright light offered glimpses of silhouettes. Several men, not just one or two. This time, the mercenaries had more than a trio in a rickety skiff. They had a better craft, perhaps a shallow draft boat suited for the swamp, and they were using it to close in from behind. "Get ready," Calvin hissed. "When I say go, I'll lay down some covering fire. Start that engine and give it all we've got." Darren's fingers fumbled for the outboard motor's ignition cord. He forced his breathing into some semblance of control, remembering the older man's instructions. Another volley of bullets tore through the air. Calvin tensed, leaning into the side of the hull, the worn metal pressed against his back. "Now!" he barked. In a flash, Calvin's M14 roared. The muzzle lit up, thunder echoing off the cypress. Darren tugged on the engine cord. On the second pull, it coughed, then sputtered to life. The boat jerked forward, rocking precariously. Calvin fired off 2 more rounds at the glaring light. He struck something, either the searchlight itself or a person behind it, because it abruptly cut out, plunging the channel back into blackness. "Go, go!" Calvin urged. Darren twisted the throttle. The skiff lunged, leaving ripples dancing behind it. Without the spotlight shining in his eyes, he could make out darker shapes. Perhaps the mercenary boat was pivoting, a figure hunched over the searchlight. More gunshots pursued them, snapping overhead, but at least the advantage had shifted. The bright strobe that pinned them was gone. Calvin ducked his head. "Keep it steady," he called over the engine's whine. With the cover of darkness, they had a chance to slip away, though the swamp was a labyrinth. A single wrong turn could strand them or run them aground. Darren clenched his teeth, trusting the older man to guide him. Adrenaline thrummed in his veins like an electric current. They sped around a bend, weaving past half-submerged logs. Calvin lowered his rifle and reached forward, tapping Darren's shoulder. "Head starboard. See that break in the tree line?" Darren squinted. Pale moonlight cut through the branches, hinting at a slightly wider passage. He angled the skiff, nearly slamming them into a protruding cypress knee. His pulse pounded in his ears, convinced they'd crash at any second. But the little vessel veered just in time, continuing into a watery channel that glistened faintly under the shifting moon. He stole a glance behind them. The wide, blazing muzzle flashes told him the mercenaries were still on their trail, though momentarily stymied by obstacles. Shouts echoed, disjointed and fading slightly. A swirl of relief coursed through him. Their quick move had bought them precious seconds. Whether they could fully escape, however, was another matter. Calvin scanned the surroundings, hawk-eyed. "Ease off the throttle," he advised. "So they can't pinpoint the engine noise as easily. We'll drift around another bend, try to break line of sight." Darren complied, but every second they slowed felt like an invitation for the pursuers to catch up. The tension in his chest mounted, threatening to choke him. Water splashed against the hull in a gentle rhythm, and the darkness seemed to swallow them. Even the frogs and cicadas had quieted, as if sensing the danger intruding on their domain. Calvin peered ahead, reading the bayou's faint cues, how the cypress trees parted, where the lily pads clustered thickly. After a few more twists, He motioned for Darren to kill the engine. They coasted quietly. The rasp of the motor's final sputter felt monumental, a stepping into near-silent gloom. Calvin placed a hand on Darren's shoulder, signaling him to stay still. They both listened, hearts pounding, ears straining. Distantly, the hum of another engine flared. It was close but muffled by thick vegetation. A few seconds passed. The sound grew louder, then began to fade, as though the boat took another path. Perhaps the mercenaries had guessed a different route. Darren exhaled a shaky breath, nearly sagging in relief. "Maybe we lost them," he whispered. "Let's not count on it," Calvin replied, voice low. "We need to confirm the way out. You still have that flashlight?" Darren nodded. He rummaged in the skiff's small supplies. A battered flashlight came to life with a yellowish glow. Calvin pulled out his folded chart again, quietly scanning by the dim beam. "If I'm right," he muttered, "there's a drainage canal about half a mile north of here. It'll be shallow but might lead to open water." Darren's eyes roamed the thick blackness. "We should go check it. If it leads out, we can circle back for the others." "Exactly. Let's move." He gave a gentle pull on the starter cord, wincing at the noise. The outboard coughed, then caught. In the hush of the swamp, even that modest purr sounded deafening. Darren guided them along slowly, weaving between trees whose ghostly branches hung overhead. The entire time, he expected a burst of muzzle flashes from the gloom, or an unseen hazard to impale their hull. But the minutes passed, silent except for insects buzzing in the muggy air. Eventually, the channel began to widen. The watery corridor opened into a battered canal lined with crumbling concrete embankments. At some long-ago time, this might have been an official drainage route, maybe used for logging or local shipping. Now it appeared half-forgotten, overgrown with moss and algae. Yet it was navigable if one was careful. Calvin nodded at the sight. "This is the place. We'll see if it connects to a deeper inlet. Watch for shallows, though." Darren eased forward. A short distance in, the reflection of the moon wavered across the water's surface. The channel still looked passable. Relief flickered inside him. If this truly opened up to the Gulf, or even to a lesser-known watery route to the coastline, then they could slip out of the bayou, loop around, and rescue the Pelican's fortune. The pirates, for better or worse, would be saved. Half a mile more, and the canal began widening further. Low-hanging branches gave way to more open sky. A faint breeze carried the brackish tang of salt water. Darren felt a swell of excitement. "We're almost there." Before Calvin could respond, an abrupt rumble sounded behind them. A bright shaft of light cut through the gloom from the canal's entrance. The mercenary boat, or another like it, had found them after all, emerging from a branching channel. Its engine roared, a deeper, more powerful timbre than their small outboard. The glare of a handheld spotlight locked onto them. "Hold on!" Calvin yelled. Gunfire erupted again. Darren floored the throttle, the skiff lurching forward. Bullets zinged off the water. One round pinged against the aluminum hull, nearly punching through. The canal curved gently left, affording little cover. Calvin returned fire with a short burst, forcing the pursuit boat to veer slightly, but they kept coming. Spray flew everywhere, water splashing into Darren's face as he guided the boat at top speed. Branches loomed overhead where the canal's edges were unkempt. He ducked just in time to avoid a whipping tangle of Spanish moss and dangling vines. Calvin crouched, rifle muzzle angled backward, trying to sight any pursuers. His shots illuminated the chase in flickers of muzzle flash. A single bullet from the enemy boat ripped through Calvin's left sleeve, barely grazing his arm. He grunted, ignoring it. Darren swerved, adrenaline pulsing in every cell of his body. He realized with sickening clarity that the mercenary boat was faster. In a straight run, they would be overtaken. Up ahead, Calvin suddenly shouted over the din. Darren followed his pointing hand. A partial break in the canal wall. Looked like old battered gates, possibly an old floodgate or lock. The remains jutted out like jagged teeth. Beyond it, the faint shimmer of open water. If they could slip through that gap, perhaps the mercenaries' larger craft would struggle. Darren didn't hesitate. He angled toward the gap, praying it was wide enough. The throttle was pinned, the engine screaming at near maximum. Calvin braced. The skiff slammed through the narrow opening, scraping the hull with a harsh metallic screech. Sparks flared in the darkness, but they made it. The abrupt shift in depth caused a great splash, water hissing up the bow. Behind them, the mercenary boat tried to follow. Darren cast a wild glance over his shoulder. The bigger boat's pilot realized too late that the gap wasn't large enough. They attempted to pivot, but the forward momentum carried them into the broken concrete. Colossal crunch echoed. Their hull collided, pitching the occupants sideways. Darren saw at least one figure tumble overboard with a panicked cry. Calvin exhaled. They're stuck. For a moment, both men locked eyes, relief flooding through them. The skiff pressed onward, the water here calmer, the sky overhead clearer. The old drainage canal spilled them onto a broad inlet that glowed faintly under the moon. The worst danger, for now, was behind them. Still, as the roar of the mercenary engine sputtered in the distance, Darren knew they weren't out of trouble entirely. The main boat might yet free itself or have more allies in the area. But at least they had discovered a path back out to the Gulf. Chapter 16. A desperate return. With the canal behind them, they drifted into the open stretch of water. Calvin pulled out his chart again. The starlight and moonlight, though partly obscured by clouds, offered enough illumination to see. He ran a finger along the roughly sketched lines. We're about 3 or 4 miles east of where the trawler is hidden, he estimated. If we loop around the swamp, we can come at the Pelican's fortune from the Gulf side. Darren nodded, wringing swamp water from his shirt. We gotta get the others. Errol needs real medical help, Bobby's shot, and who knows if those other mercenaries are zeroing in. I bet they realized we left. They might go after the trawler directly. Agreed. We'll try to slip back around. But we won't be able to get too close if the main mercenary craft is patrolling. We'll have to approach carefully. Calvin paused, wincing as he pressed a hand to his left bicep. The bullet graze had left a seeping wound. Mind digging through that first aid kit for me? He asked. Darren rummaged under the seat, retrieving a small kit. Here. He passed Calvin a roll of gauze and antiseptic wipes. Watching the older man methodically clean the wound, Darren felt a pang of guilt. Just hours ago, they had forcibly tied this man up in his own storage hold, threatening him. Now he was wounded, saving them all. The contrast made Darren's face burn with shame. You hold up okay? Calvin asked quietly, his expression unreadable. Yeah. Didn't get hit? Darren said, rubbing the back of his neck. Thanks to you. Calvin finished dressing the wound with a makeshift bandage. Don't think too hard about it, kid. Right now, we survive. He made a rough knot to secure the gauze. Then he motioned to the outboard. Let's circle wide. Keep an eye on the horizon. If we see any sign of a boat coming, we kill the engine and hide behind the reeds. Darren nodded. The next half hour or so passed in a tense vigil. He guided the skiff in a wide loop along the edge of the swamp, partially re-entering smaller channels when necessary to avoid open waters. The mercenaries might be scanning the coastline, though it was late and storm clouds threatened overhead. Occasional flashes of distant lightning illuminated the horizon. At last, the flicker of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. They had been out all night, a surreal gauntlet of violence and fear. That faint glow on the horizon made Darren's eyes burn with fatigue. Calvin, though also clearly exhausted, remained vigilant, scanning for any silhouette of a hostile craft. They approached from the north side of the bayou, where cypress and salt marshes converged. A weaving path eventually spit them out near the area where the Pelican's fortune should have been anchored. Calvin killed the engine, letting them drift with the tide. "There," Darren whispered, pointing. The battered fishing trawler lay half-concealed among the cypress. In the pale dawn, he could make out its chipped hull. The boat hadn't moved from its improvised mooring spot. No sign of enemies. No lights. Nothing. Calvin motioned for silence as he paddled them closer. They eased the skiff alongside the trawler, carefully scanning the deck. No movement. Darren's stomach clenched with worry. Were they ambushed? Or had the pirates left? Holding the pistol tightly, he braced to climb aboard. A figure emerged from behind the pilot house, leveling a submachine gun. Darren froze, finger on the trigger. Then he realized it was Delilah. Her eyes bulged when she recognized them, and she lowered her weapon, exhaling in relief. "We thought you were goners," she hissed. Calvin climbed aboard first, scanning for any sign of an ambush. The deck was damp from the night's rain, and morning light bathed everything in a pale glow. Delilah beckoned them forward. "Where's everyone?" Darren asked. She jerked her head toward the cabin. "LT's below with Errol. Bobby's up front, watching for trouble. It's been quiet for hours. We heard gunshots in the distance, but never saw who it was." Calvin gave a curt nod. "We found a route out, but we had a run-in with the mercenaries again. They might have more men. We have to move soon." He shot Delilah a look. "How's Errol?" "Stable but losing blood," she said, swallowing hard. "He needs a hospital." Calvin slid past her, ignoring her suspicious glance, and entered the pilot house. Bobby was slumped in the corner, shoulder heavily bandaged, eyes sunken with fatigue. At the sight of Calvin, he mustered a faint snarl. "Well, you made it back. You sound disappointed," Calvin said. Bobby shook his head, wincing. "Where's this path you found?" "Involves a drainage canal off the east side of the bayou, but it's blocked for larger craft in certain spots. It'll be tricky to navigate with a boat this size." Calvin cast a look at the Pelican's fortune's battered hull. "We can try, or we can cut across open water, risking the mercenaries if they're still out there." Bobby let out a ragged sigh. "What's the lesser of two evils?" Calvin shrugged. "If we try the canal route, we might run aground or get pinned by smaller patrols. If we head out into the Gulf, we might run into the main boat again. Either way, it's a gamble." Delilah came forward. "Which do you prefer?" The older man's gaze swept across them. "This is my boat. I know her capabilities. If we lighten the load, maybe we can slip through the drainage canal. We ditch anything non-essential, rely on shallow draft to get through. Once we hit open water on the other side, we can punch it north along the coast to a real port." LT emerged from below deck, face wan. "We also have to consider Errol. If we're taking the canal, is it going to take longer to reach a hospital?" "It's longer in distance, but we might avoid a firefight," Calvin said. "Out in open water, if we run across a fast mercenary craft, we can't outrun them in a battered trawler. We'll be forced to fight. That could risk everyone, especially a guy bleeding in the bunk." Bobby tested his wounded shoulder, grimacing. "Fine, we do it your way. But if you pull anything, Marine, we'll end it here." Calvin met his gaze levelly. "I saved your lives. If I wanted you dead, I'd have left you for those scum in the swamp." An uneasy hush fell. Delilah finally asked, "So what do we ditch?" Chapter 17. Stripping down for survival. They got to work at once. Delilah, LT, and Darren hauled unnecessary items onto the deck. Old crates, surplus fishing gear, nets that weren't critical, even the heavy cooler. The Pelican's fortune's weight needed reducing so it could sit higher in the water, giving them a better chance in the shallow channel. Bobby, despite his wound, supervised with a constant scowl. Errol lay below, occasionally moaning. LT tended to him as best he could, keeping a cloth pressed to the bandage. The man had drifted in and out of consciousness. Blood loss was taking a serious toll. Every so often, Darren caught a glimpse of his pallor and felt a pang of dread. Time wasn't on their side. Despite all that tension, they made quick progress. Within an hour, they'd cleared out a substantial amount of clutter. The early morning sun climbed, burning off some of the swamp's lingering mist. Mosquitoes buzzed in thick clouds, especially near standing water on deck. The group was sweaty, tired, and anxious, but they had a plan. Calvin stood at the pilot house controls, checking gauges. "We're running low on fuel, but enough for one decent trip if we don't push the throttle to the max." He glanced around. "Darren, help me with the anchor." They raised the anchor and stowed it, each straining. Bobby hovered, gripping his pistol. Delilah finished tying down the last few items they were keeping, such as medical supplies, some rations, and extra ammunition. "Engine's good," Calvin announced after a quick inspection. "We'll have to go slow at first, find the channel. You all might want to keep your weapons ready. If those mercs come at us again, we can't hesitate." Bobby grunted. "Don't plan on it." "Darren," Calvin said, "you'll act as a spotter. Stand on the bow, watch for submerged logs or shallows. Call out if the water's too low." The young man nodded, though the thought of standing up front with no cover made his heart flutter with nerves. Still, he accepted the role without complaint. There were bigger dangers than falling overboard. With everything set, they gently pulled away from the improvised mooring and slipped deeper into the bayou. Calvin guided the trawler slowly, scanning for the best route out. Darren leaned over the railing, peering into the murky water. Occasionally, a swirl of black shapes indicated fish or a gator lurking below. He called out water depths using a pole they'd found, tapping the bottom as the boat inched forward. Behind them, the swamp lay silent. No thunder of an approaching motor, no bark of gunfire. Darren's nerves jangled at every splash, expecting an ambush. Yet the hours ticked by with no sign of their pursuers. The sun rose, bringing oppressive heat that pressed sweat from every pore. A sense of uneasy calm crept in. Maybe the mercenaries were stuck or had retreated. Maybe they'd decided the job wasn't worth the risk. Before noon, Calvin spotted the stretch of canal he and Darren had discovered earlier. The same area where they'd nearly been gunned down, except they'd been in a tiny skiff. Now the battered trawler was approaching. Fallen trees created partial obstructions. Bobby and Delilah took positions along the rails with rope in hand, ready to push or pull stray logs aside. LT remained below, tending Errol, who moaned with each bump. "Easy," Delilah called out as they nudged into the narrower channel. The boat's engine rumbled softly. Darren paced the bow, calling water depths. A few times, the hull scraped the bottom, sending chills of alarm through them all. But with some quick reversing and careful angles, they pushed ahead. At a bend in the canal, they spotted the broken remains of the mercenaries' smaller craft that Darren and Calvin had destroyed hours before. The half-submerged hull jutted out from a tangle of cypress roots. No sign of the men who had been in it. The stench of spilled gasoline permeated the humid air. "Keep going," Calvin ordered. "We're close to that floodgate." Soon enough, the battered concrete structure loomed ahead. Darren recalled how their skiff had barely squeezed through. The trawler was obviously bigger. Calvin eyed the gap, lips tight. "We've got a few inches on either side, if that. We have to line it up perfectly." Delilah scowled at the broken edges of concrete, spotted with rusted rebar. "If we scrape too hard, we might tear the hull open." Bobby cursed under his breath. "Then do it right the first time." Calvin's expression hardened, ignoring Bobby's tone. "Darren, stay on the bow. When I say, you wave me left or right." Darren's stomach squirmed, but he nodded. He clutched the rail, eyes flicking between the concrete opening and the boat's edges. Calvin eased the throttle. Slowly, The Pelican's fortune inched forward. The squeak and groan of the hull resonated through Darren's body. His hands felt clammy on the rail. "Left a hair," Darren called softly. Calvin adjusted the wheel. The hull's starboard side cleared the jagged concrete by mere inches, though it groaned as a chunk of rebar scraped a patch of paint. Darren's teeth clenched. Delilah slipped to starboard, using a pole to nudge the protruding metal away. Sparks danced briefly. "Now right, just a touch," Darren said, breath tight. Calvin complied. They drifted inch by inch, the boat's frame trembling from the friction. Finally, with a grinding squeal, the stern slid clear. The battered fishing trawler lurched forward, free of the narrow gate. On the far side, the water broadened. The canal led to the inlet that Darren and Calvin had discovered, a route out toward the open gulf. Relief flickered across everyone's faces. Delilah let out a breath she'd been holding. "Thank God." Calvin called out, "Check the bilge, make sure we didn't spring a leak." Bobby and LT moved quickly below, scanning for any sign of water pouring in. They returned moments later, shouting that it looked okay. The hull was scuffed but not breached. "Then let's get out of here," Calvin muttered, giving the throttle a slight push. They picked up speed, the boat's prow slicing through the now wider water. The humidity lifted somewhat as the channel opened up. Eventually, they reached the same broad stretch that the small skiff had discovered. Ahead lay the mouth of a shallow bay leading into the Gulf of Mexico. Darren's heart soared at the sight: open skies, shifting waves, a horizon that promised escape from the swamp's claustrophobic grasp. Errol's moans still echoed from below, but now they had a chance to reach a port or city with a hospital. They had truly done it, survived the night, dodged the mercenaries, and found a way out. Chapter 18: Shadows on the Gulf. It was late afternoon by the time the Pelican's fortune emerged onto open water. The skies were partly overcast, patches of sun spangling the waves. The southwestern coastline of Louisiana lay in the distance, hazy with humidity. The battered trawler chugged ahead, salt spray misting the deck. For a while, they cruised in cautious silence, scanning the horizon. A few scattered fishing boats dotted the water, nothing suspicious. Calvin steered them on a northeasterly course, aiming for a more populated stretch of coast where they could find medical facilities and possibly the authorities, though the pirates themselves harbored no love for law enforcement. Still, urgent necessity outweighed old grudges. Bobby slumped near the door to the pilot house, wincing each time the boat hit a wave. Delilah leaned against the rail, wiping sweat from her brow. LT hovered near the hatch to the lower deck, checking on Errol. Darren stood beside Calvin, the warm wind brushing his hair, trying to imagine a scenario in which they escaped fully, no more ambushes. Then again, what if the mercenaries had given up? It might be over. But the Gulf can be vast, and illusions of safety can shatter in a moment. As late afternoon light glimmered, Delilah shouted in alarm. Darren spun, seeing her pointing to the southeast. Through a gap in the clouds, a shape materialized, large, sleek, with tinted windows. A powerboat, not your typical fishing vessel. The speed, size, and design looked like a modern patrol craft or a private security boat. And it was headed straight toward them. No, Bobby muttered, staggering to his feet, his injured shoulder throbbing. Not them again. Calvin's expression darkened. Could be the same group, or more like them. Don't panic yet. Delilah's hands trembled over her submachine gun. I'm out of ammo except for half a mag. We can't fight them if they're heavily armed. Then we try to run or we try to bluff, Calvin said. We have to see how fast they close in. He pushed the throttle as far as the old engine would allow. The boat churned forward, but the Pelican's fortune simply wasn't built for speed. The incoming vessel cut across the water, a white wake trailing behind it like a signature of power. Darren's stomach twisted as the distance between them shrank. LT joined them topside, face drawn. Errol's delirious. We gotta get him to a hospital soon or he won't make it. Calvin nodded grimly. We'll do our best. Within minutes, the larger craft drew close enough that they could see at least 4 figures on the deck. One raised binoculars. Another pointed. Then a crackle of radio static blared from the Pelican's fortune's console, which had somehow survived the earlier firefight. A gravelly voice came through. Unidentified fishing vessel, this is Captain Marco Reyes. Heave to immediately. Repeat, cut your engine and prepare to be boarded. Bobby's jaw tightened. They're not Coast Guard. That's not the official frequency or call sign. Calvin keyed the mic. Captain Reyes, we have wounded on board. We need medical assistance. He gave an ambiguous response on purpose, trying to gauge the situation. A pause crackled. Then the voice returned, heave to or we'll open fire. You've got 10 seconds. Are we sure these are the mercenaries? Darren asked, knuckles white on the rail. Bobby snorted. That's not a rescue tone. That's a threat. Calvin cut the radio and looked at Delilah, Bobby, LT, and Darren. We have one choice if we want to avoid an all-out shootout. We appear to surrender, but be ready to fight if they come aboard brandishing weapons. Maybe, just maybe, we can negotiate. Bobby started to protest, but a savage wave of pain overcame him. He nodded through gritted teeth. Fine. Calvin throttled down. The Pelican's fortune shuddered and slowed. The suspicious vessel closed in, matching their speed. Up close, it appeared formidable, over 50 feet, bristling with rods that could hide weapon mounts, tinted windows along a sleek cabin. The men on deck wore dark tactical gear. One raised a loudspeaker. Stand by for boarding. Keep your hands visible. Darren's heart hammered. He couldn't imagine these people offering help. They looked deadly. Delilah's lips pressed into a thin line as she set her submachine gun on the deck, hands raised. Bobby also lifted his good arm. LT did the same. Calvin placed his rifle aside, face carefully neutral. They all waited. A smaller inflatable from the bigger craft motored toward them, carrying 4 men. Each had a sidearm. One held an assault rifle. They came alongside, tossed a line, and boarded the Pelican's fortune. The leader, a tall, lean man with a braided goatee, scanned the group with cold eyes. His men fanned out. You're not the Coast Guard, Calvin said flatly. We have a seriously injured man on board. You want to help or what? The tall man eyed him. My name's Marco Reyes, and I don't provide help for free. Let's see who we've got. He turned to one of his men who marched below deck, presumably to check. 2 others took up positions with weapons half raised. Darren swallowed hard, hands still visible. This new group was clearly well-armed, but it was unclear if they were connected to the earlier ambushers. Reyes flicked a glance at Bobby's bandaged shoulder. Looks like you've been in a firefight. With who? Couldn't tell you, Calvin replied, tone distant. They came at us in the swamp. Reyes nodded slowly, his gaze shifting among the battered pirates. Then to Calvin. You look well enough for a man traveling with criminals. He jerked his chin at Delilah, Bobby, Darren, and LT, that your crew. Calvin pursed his lips. They hijacked my boat, if you want to know the truth. I'm the owner, Calvin read. They're the idiots who got me shot at. Reyes raised an eyebrow. Interesting. His lips curled faintly. So you're at odds, yet traveling together. And you want my help? Darren dared to speak up. We have a wounded man who needs a real hospital. If you could Reyes turned a frigid stare on him. Quiet. Then, to Calvin, he said, Captain Reed, I've heard some rumors along the coast of a certain ex-Marine with a penchant for trouble. That ring a bell. Calvin's muscles tensed. I served in the Marines. I fish now. Trouble found me. One of Reyes's men returned from below deck. There's a guy in bad shape down there. Probably needs an operating room if he's to live. Reyes nodded. We have some medical supplies on our boat. But we don't do free favors. What do you want? Calvin asked, wariness coloring his words. A hungry glint shone in Reyes's eyes. We're on contract to a certain consortium that doesn't appreciate random pirates messing around in these waters. But you say you're the victim here. Maybe we can do business if you prove your innocence and compensate us for our time. He had the battered trawler. Got anything of value in that hold? Weapons? Contraband? Bobby stiffened, his expression turning sour. Delilah looked ready to spit. LT glanced nervously at Calvin. Darren's chest twisted in dread, sensing how precarious the moment was. If they refused to cooperate, Reyes might shoot them all or confiscate the boat. If they cooperated, they might lose everything anyway. But Errol's life depended on immediate assistance. Calvin locked his jaw. Not sure what you expect from a fishing trawler. There's no big treasure aboard. Reyes shrugged as if unconcerned. Then maybe we'll just confiscate the boat as payment and tow you all to shore if that's your only option. That's not happening, Calvin said, steel in his tone. This boat's mine. Reyes's men exchanged glances, tension spiking. The scene could erupt into violence in an instant. Darren's pulse hammered. He saw the muzzle of the nearest guard's assault rifle shifting slightly, a hair's breadth from opening fire. Now, Reyes purred. Let's not be hasty. Perhaps we can find an arrangement. We have a small onboard clinic with basic surgical tools. enough to stabilize your wounded friend. If you let us search this boat, top to bottom, and we find something worth our while, that might cover the cost of care." His gaze flicked between Calvin and the pirates. "Otherwise, we can part ways right now. But your man downstairs probably won't make it to a hospital in time." Bobby spat. "This is blackmail." Reyes gave him a level stare. "I call it business. You can always say no." He turned back to Calvin. "Your call, Captain Reed." Calvin hesitated. His fury at the hijackers was eclipsed by a sense of responsibility toward a fellow human being, Errol. Even if Errol had been part of the group that stole his boat, Calvin wasn't the type to let a man die if he could help it. The older Marine exhaled, eyes flicking to the others. "We have no hidden cargo, but if you want to search, go ahead. If you find anything of value, we can discuss terms." He paused. "And if you don't, you still help the wounded man." Reyes's eyes narrowed, reading Calvin's steely resolve. Finally, he tilted his head. "Fine. Show me around." Two of his armed men remained topside, covering Bobby, Delilah, LT, and Darren while Reyes followed Calvin below. They disappeared into the cramped interior. Darren exchanged worried glances with LT. Delilah seethed in silence, fists clenched. Bobby slumped again, panting through the pain. Every minute stretched interminably. One of Reyes's men jerked his rifle at Darren, motioning him away from the pilot house. Delilah, also under watch, glared but complied. The tension was suffocating, like the thick humidity pressing from all sides. Finally, after a long 10 minutes, Reyes emerged, followed by Calvin. The ex-Marine's face was impassive, giving away nothing. Reyes looked mildly annoyed, as though he'd found less than expected. "Not much worth taking," he announced to his men. "A small stash of spare parts for the engine, some fishing gear, hardly worth a fraction of our medical kit." He gestured to the battered rifle leaning in the pilot house. "That old M14 might fetch a few hundred on the black market, but not exactly prime." "What about the boat itself?" asked one of his men. Reyes pursed his lips. "It's a hunk of junk. We'd waste more time hauling it than it's worth." He locked eyes with Calvin. "But I did see something interesting. The modifications you made to the hold. Those hidden compartments under the deck. You sure you're only hauling fish?" Calvin's jaw shifted slightly. "Those compartments are old modifications from the previous owner. I store gear in them. Check for yourself, you'll find nets and canisters of diesel, not contraband." Reyes seemed unconvinced. A flicker of suspicion passed over his face. "I might, but for now we'll cut a deal. You hand over your weapons, we'll patch up your friend enough so he can make it to a hospital. Then we part ways. Fair?" Delilah opened her mouth in protest, but Bobby shot her a quelling look. They had no choice. If they refused, Errol died. If they agreed, they'd be unarmed, but maybe still alive. Calvin nodded slowly. "Deal." Grudgingly, they gathered what meager firepower they had left: Delilah's submachine gun, Bobby's pistol, Darren's pistol with a half-full mag, the old M14. Reyes collected them with a smug air, handing them off to a subordinate. "Good. Let's move him over," he said, jerking a thumb at Errol's location below deck. "And keep in mind, if you try anything, we'll blow holes in this tub." With a sense of grim resignation, the pirates, plus Calvin, helped carry Errol topside. A stretcher from Reyes's inflatable boat awaited. They loaded the pale, barely conscious man aboard, mindful not to jostle him too much. Darren steadied Errol's head, feeling the clammy skin. Errol's eyes fluttered, a groan slipping out. This might be his last chance. Reyes and two men boarded the inflatable with the stretcher, guiding it across the short gap to their large craft. "We'll patch him up," Reyes said. "One of you can come along if you want to watch. The rest stay here, under guard." Bobby gestured to LT. "You go. You're best with patching him up anyway." LT looked at Calvin uncertainly. The older man gave a curt nod, and LT followed the stretcher to the inflatable, their anxious eyes flicking to the armed guards. The inflatable rumbled away, returning to the bigger vessel. Two of Reyes's men remained behind on the Pelican's fortune, rifles ready, ensuring no one tried to flee. Chapter 19: Conversations Under Duress. On board the battered trawler, the atmosphere felt strangled by tension. Darren, Delilah, Bobby, and Calvin were effectively under armed guard, powerless. With the humidity rising, sweat coated every inch of Darren's skin. Bobby perched on a crate, face twisted in pain, ignoring the guard's watchful gaze. Delilah paced in restless loops. Now and then she glared at Calvin. "You gave away our guns. What if they decide to just kill us all? Calvin answered quietly, if I hadn't, they might have killed Errol on the spot by refusing treatment. She shook her head, mouth set in a grim line. You don't know Reyes. I've heard the name before, a pirate hunter for hire. He's rumored to work for big clients who want the Gulf rid of small-time raiders. I'm guessing we're just worthless scum to him. Bobby's eyes flickered with resignation. We didn't exactly do ourselves any favors by hijacking this tub. We're small fish, easy targets. He shot a bitter glance at Calvin. Should have known an ex-Marine would bring us trouble. Calvin folded his arms. If you want to blame me for your choices, that's your business. I'm just here trying to survive. The guard nearest them barked, shut it. No talking. But the second guard, a slightly younger man with a faint accent, was more curious. He held the rifle but eyed Calvin with interest. Aren't you the one who fought off a group in the swamp last night? My employer said you were tough. Calvin regarded him coolly. You sound surprised. The guard shrugged. Hard to believe an old fisherman could outshoot trained men. He's no fisherman, Delilah muttered, half under her breath. The guard frowned at her, finger inching on the trigger. One more word out of line and I'll fix that mouth of yours. Tension crackled. Darren stared at the deck, not wanting to invite more wrath. The seconds dragged. Minutes turned into an hour. The large vessel drifted nearby, presumably with Errol and LT aboard, receiving treatment. Or so they all hoped. Bobby's complexion had grown grayish from the pain and blood loss, but he fought to maintain a brave face. Delilah eventually slumped down, the pacing too exhausting under the brutal sun. Darren, for lack of anything else to do, kept his eyes on the horizon, praying for a miracle. Finally, the radio squawked. One of the guards answered in a terse voice, listening, then nodded at his partner. They say to bring the rest of them over, he announced, leveling his rifle at Calvin. Move to the inflatable. No sudden moves. Darren's throat tightened. What's happening? Shut up and go, the guard snapped. Calvin gave the younger man a warning glance, don't resist. Together, the group trudged to the starboard side, where the inflatable from Reyes's vessel had returned. The guards corralled them into the small craft, forcing them to sit near the bow. Then they sped across the short distance to Reyes's imposing boat. Darren noticed the name painted on the hull in black letters, Damocles. Ominous. Once aboard Damocles, they were led inside an interior that felt half yacht, half paramilitary HQ. A small central corridor led to a lounge area from which open doors led to private cabins. Another door revealed a compact infirmary. That's where they found LT leaning against a counter, eyes red-rimmed, while Errol lay on a cot with bandages around his thigh. An foredrip fed him translucent fluid. Hey, Darren whispered, stepping forward. One guard shoved him back, but Reyes's voice echoed from the corridor, let him see. Darren approached carefully, heart pounding. Errol was still unconscious, but color seemed to have returned to his cheeks and his breathing was steadier. LT glanced at Darren, relief evident. They removed the bullet and stitched him up. Gave him antibiotics. He's gonna make it, I think. Reyes stood in the doorway, arms folded. We're men of our word. Calvin surveyed the scene, expression guarded. Thank you. Reyes pursed his lips. This is where the real negotiations begin. We saved his life. You owe us. Bobby, near the back of the group, spat, how much? Reyes regarded him coolly. I could say 40 grand for the surgery alone. But you don't have that. So here's another option. I hire you, specifically Captain Reed, to help me hunt down the real threat in this region. Word is you single-handedly took out half a mercenary crew in the swamp. I need that skill set. Calvin's brow furrowed. Why would I help you? Because if you don't, I'll take your boat as payment or perhaps turn you over to certain individuals you crossed. I suspect they pay a handsome bounty for your head. His gaze swept over the pirates. As for your associates, I might keep them as labor or hand them off to authorities. Doesn't matter to me. The point is, you're in no position to refuse. Delilah glared. Blackmail again. Reyes smiled thinly. Business. Bobby tried stepping forward, but a guard pressed the rifle muzzle into his chest. He hissed in pain, backing off. Calvin's eyes flicked around the room. Errol was barely stable, LT was unarmed, Bobby was severely wounded, and Delilah only had half a mag back on the trawler, which was now confiscated. Darren felt his own helplessness like a knot in his throat. What do you want me to do, exactly? Calvin asked slowly. Reyes stepped aside, gesturing for Calvin to follow him into the corridor. The ex-Marine complied, leaving the others behind under guard. They disappeared into a side cabin. Tension hung heavy in the cramped infirmary. Delilah paced again, ignoring the guard's glare. "We can't let them force him to do their dirty work," she whispered to Bobby, and LT. Darren hovered near Errol, uncertain. Bobby exhaled shakily. "We've got no leverage." LT rubbed his temple. "At least Errol's alive." "But what then? This Reyes is dangerous." Darren bit his lip. A swirl of guilt and frustration churned inside him. If they hadn't stolen Calvin's boat, none of this would have happened. Now all of them were at the mercy of a mercenary pirate hunter with questionable motives. Minutes later, Calvin returned, escorted by Reyes. The older man's face remained stony, but Darren spotted a flicker of resignation in his eyes. Reyes clapped a hand on his shoulder. "We've reached an agreement. Captain Reed will assist me in locating and neutralizing the group that's been running violent raids off the Louisiana coast. Apparently, they're tied to a larger organization with big money behind them, maybe the same group that attacked you in the swamp." The mention of that fight sent a twinge of memory through Darren. Hadn't Calvin said their gear was too sophisticated for ordinary thugs? Reyes continued, "He'll act as my local guide and muscle. In return, I'll let your boat go once I've verified you're not smuggling anything for those criminals. We'll even drop off your wounded at a local hospital. The rest of you can come along or stay behind, it hardly matters to me." Delilah bristled. "What about the ransom you demanded?" Reyes waved a dismissive hand. "We can settle that after the mission, depending on how well it goes. If your friend Errol recovers, he'll be moved to a hospital facility. Meanwhile, you three," he nodded at Delilah, "Bobby, Darren, can remain on board under light guard, or I can dump you at the nearest port for the local cops. Your call." Bobby's brows knitted. "Local cops? That's practically a death sentence for us." "So's crossing me," Reyes said with a humorless smile. Calvin spoke up, voice rasping with controlled anger. "I told him it's best if we keep the Pelican's fortune in range. I know these waters. If we're going after heavily armed raiders, it's better I command my own boat." Reyes agreed on condition he has men aboard to ensure I don't run off. Darren's eyes widened. "So we're teaming up with them to fight the mercenaries?" Reyes shook his head. "Not you. Captain Reed, maybe one or two others. The rest of you can stay locked in your cabins unless needed. That's more than fair, given how useless you look." He jerked a thumb at Bobby's wounded shoulder. "You're not fit for combat, anyway." A swirling mixture of relief and dread washed through Darren. On the one hand, they wouldn't be killed outright. On the other, they were dragged into a paramilitary mission. All because they'd picked the wrong boat to steal. Bobby scowled, but said nothing. Delilah's face hardened. LT hovered near Errol, who lay unconscious. Finally, Calvin turned to the group. "If anyone's got a better plan, now's the time. Because otherwise, I'm going with Reyes to settle this. Once it's over, he'll release the boat and you." Silence. Delilah looked at Darren, searching his face for any spark of an idea. He had none. "I guess we go along," Darren finally whispered. Reyes grunted as if satisfied. He turned to one of his men. "Get them in the lounge area, lock them down. And get me a secure line. I need to talk with the client." Chapter 20, An Unlikely Alliance. Time blurred for the battered pirates and their one-time hostage as the arrangement took shape. The Barnacles and the Pelican's fortune traveled in tandem, heading eastward along the Louisiana coastline. Calvin's boat, now sporting two of Reyes's armed men as watchers, towed slightly behind the bigger craft. Bobby, Delilah, Darren, and LT remained on Barnacles for the initial leg of the journey. Errol, stabilized, lay in the infirmary. Reyes spent hours in private communication, presumably coordinating with his mysterious backer.